approximately 45 minutes. With time at the end for questions. I'll be sending some corresponding links in the chat throughout the presentation. And if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the chat function at the bottom bar or the raise hand function, and the presenters will be happy to answer any questions you have. We do ask, in order to preserve some bandwidth on Zoom, because this is a larger meeting, to keep yourself muted and your video off, and that just ensures everyone can hear the presentation. So with that, I will pass it over to our first presenter, Sam Danaisky from Renew Wisconsin.
Thank you, Morgan, and thank you all so much for joining us today on this lovely day. Really excited today to talk to you about solar power, especially getting solar for schools and for nonprofits. Also, really want to thank our partners for making this webinar possible. The Madison Metropolitan School District, the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, and the Couliard Solar Foundation as well. Without their help, this definitely could not be possible. So the main objective that we're going to be talking about today is how to go solar. But before we do that, I want to get a sense of kind of who is in the room right now. So we're going to send out a poll, and I'm going to ask you to just kind of tell us where you're coming from, whether it be from a public school, a private school, some other kind of nonprofit, or if you're a solar developer or something else. So we'll just give everyone a few seconds to fill that out, and then I'll know a little bit more just how to tailor the conversation today. Okay, so let's hope everybody gets their responses in. Looks like we have, excuse me, a good combination of public school and other nonprofits. So that's really good information to know. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about specifically how to go solar depending on what kind of a nonprofit you're from. But depending on which one, largely it's sort of the same process. So the first thing that you need to know to go solar is you need to learn about solar. Good news, you're doing that right now. The second thing we want to talk about when we go through the solar buying process, when we go through the solar process, I should say, you want to seek some bids, ideally two to three bids from solar contractors across the state. After that, ask questions. Once you get your bids back, you'll be able to talk to other people, other solar owners, your solar contractors as well, get all the information you can from them. After that, you want to analyze your own financial situation. Obviously, we're all coming from different areas here, especially in terms of our finances. So you definitely want to take a look at that before you take any next steps. And then once you have all of that information together, you can evaluate, is solar right for you or is it not? And then once you have all that information, then you can finally make your decision. So how are we going to get to those answers? How are we going to provide all this information here in these 6 steps? Well, here's our agenda today. We're first going to be going over some real basic information about solar. We can get into the details a little bit more at the end at the Q&A session, but we're just going to make sure everyone is starting out from the same point. After that, we're going to dive into programs and incentives that can help alleviate some of the upfront costs and some of the other roadblocks that a lot of organizations have when doing solar. We're then going to hear from Midwest Renewable Energy Association and Amanda. She's going to be talking about the Solar on Schools program. I'm going to be talking about a few more other programs and incentives after that organizations can utilize in their solar journey. After that, we're going to hear a case study from Madison Metropolitan School District and from Marcy. She's going to be talking about what West High School did. And then after that, we're going to go through a little bit more financial information, ways to pay for things. And then we're going to hopefully have a few more minutes at the end for a Q&A session. So without wasting any more time, we're going to jump right into solar basics. There is a lot of information out there about solar. As you can probably guess, some of it's good, some of it's bad. A lot of things have changed just in the last 5 to 10 years, but I want to make sure that, like I said, we're kind of starting out on the same level. And we might not throw out a lot of these terms in today's discussion, but as you go further down the road in your solar journey, you're definitely going to start to hear some of these terms thrown out. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands these terms. So when your solar developer, your solar contractor start using them, you don't feel completely overwhelmed. So the first term is kilowatt. When we talk about kilowatts, often we're talking about the size of a system, the capacity of energy. So a solar array, or a solar project, might be 5 kilowatts for a house, or 20 kilowatts for a church, or 200 kilowatts for a school. So we're talking about basically like the amount of panels that you need. A kilowatt hour is similar, but a little bit different. This is the amount of energy that's produced over time. Usually we talk about how much kilowatt hours a solar array produces, maybe how many kilowatt hours a facility or a building will need to offset. So in that, we're kind of talking about your usage. How much energy do you use? Solar cell. If you look at that photo there on the left, you'll see a solar panel and some workers putting in some solar. Those small little squares within the solar panel are the solar cells, and they do the actual conversion into energy, collecting photons from the sun and creating electricity in that way. A solar array is a collection of solar panels. So you might have a 3-panel array or a 4,000 panel array, really just depends. So we're talking about specifically all of the collection of panels within a system. And then the solar system itself is all of the components in a solar project. I often mistakenly use array and system interchangeably. I need to stop doing that. So if I do, I certainly apologize. But the solar system is everything thrown together. And that is shown in this schematic right here. So this is a solar system, and this is what we call a grid-tied solar system. And 99% of the time, when we're talking about solar systems, especially here in Wisconsin, we are talking about grid-tied systems. Another misconception I think that a lot of people have about solar energy is, once you get solar panels on your house or your building or whatever, that you're off grid, you're on an island by yourself. That can be the case, but most of the time, it's not true. Most of the time, you're still connected to the grid. And I'm going to talk about sort of the reasons why that is good here in just a minute. So this is obviously a schematic of a home, but it doesn't matter if it's a home or a church or a school. All of the grid-tied solar systems work in the same way. So in a normal building, normal house, normal facility, what happens is your electricity comes in from the grid off the power lines. It flows through your meter, goes through your circuit box, and then out into your appliances. Now, with a solar array, things work a little differently, as you can probably guess. So the sun will strike your panels right here. Those solar cells create what we call DC, or direct current. That current then flows down into your inverter right here. That's kind of the other main component of a solar system, is the inverter. And that does sort of the behind the scenes work. It's kind of the brains behind a solar system. So that inverter converts the DC electricity, which is produced by your solar panels, into AC electricity, or alternating current, which is what is used by most of our electronics and lights and appliances and things like that. So once it passes through your inverter, it goes on into your circuit box and then out into your lights, your TVs, your appliances, your electronics, et cetera, et cetera. At night, on very cloudy days, when your solar array is not producing any electricity, you can still pull electricity in off the grid. And basically, you have no disruption in your service, in your lifestyle. You really, most of the time, obviously, people cannot tell if their coffee maker is being powered by the sun or if it's being powered by the utility. So there's no disruption in service at all, which is what makes these grid-tied systems really attractive. The other thing that makes them really attractive is when your solar system is producing more electricity than you need, what happens is, instead of your inverter sending that electricity to your circuit box and to your appliances, it actually sends it back out through the meter and then onto the line, onto the grid, down to your neighbor, to your neighbor's neighbor, et cetera, et cetera. And when it does that, your utility meter will actually move backwards. And that is something that we call net metering, which is really, really important. Virtually every utility in Wisconsin has some form of net metering. They are a little different. They are all a little different, which can be very, very confusing. But essentially what it means is you can take electricity that you make during peak hours, during sunny hours, and you can use that during sort of off-peak hours. And this is a schematic right here, a drawing, if you will, of a real solar array at work. So this building right here is producing, or excuse me, is consuming electricity. That's the area in red. It's kind of spiky a lot of times. Things like refrigerators or air conditioners will cycle on and off. The electricity produced by the solar array, however, is actually really consistent, really uniform. So it produces electricity throughout the day, and then as the sun goes down, it turns off. So essentially, what net metering allows us to do is take that green energy there that the solar array produces and kind of fill it into these areas in red, which is where we're consuming electricity, but we're still having to pull it in off the grid. So the good news is, without battery backup, you might not be able to use that electricity in real time, but from a utility billing perspective, you're still able to get credits for all of that electricity you use. We like to call it rollover electricity for those of us out there that remember rollover minutes on a cell phone. I know that analogy is getting a little bit dated, but that's the kind of the best analogy that I can use for net metering. And we can go over that a little bit more in detail at the end as well. And then the last thing I want to talk about here before I kind of change gears is what makes for a good solar ready facility. Ideally, you want to have a rooftop or an area. It doesn't necessarily have to be on your roof, of course. You want an unshaded location where you can gather as much of the sun's rays as possible. You also, and this usually becomes more of an impact for households, for residential systems, than it does for churches and schools and things like that. But if you have really tall trees or maybe other buildings that are blocking your sun, obviously your solar panels are not going to produce as much energy. So first thing you want is an unshaded location. Second thing you want, if you're going to go with a roof, you want a good quality roof, ideally a pretty new roof. The reason for that is these solar panels will last 25 to 35, maybe even 50 years. And so you want to go in with as new a roof as possible, because if you're going to have to repair that roof or redo that roof in the meantime, that's going to cut into your organization's return on investment. So ideally, you want to have that all in place before you install. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is energy efficiency. The kilowatt hour that you don't use is the cheapest one you can possibly get. So you want to curb your energy as much as possible. There are many, many different ways to do this. I certainly suggest start with some of the low-hanging fruit, upgrade your lighting, then maybe look at furnace or HVAC systems, things like that. Once that occurs, once you have your facility running about as energy efficient as possible, then you want to look into solar, because that will allow you to install a smaller array and thus save a little bit more money as well. So that concludes sort of the solar basics. I went through it very quickly, obviously. We could talk for several hours about just solar and how it's produced and net metering and things like that. But I want to save some time certainly to go over some other things too. And that kind of shifts gears into our programs and incentives category. So a lot of changes have happened with solar energy just in the last 5 to 10 years. 5 to 10 years ago, solar was much more expensive. The prices have come down at least 75%, sometimes closer to 85 or even 90%, depending on what type of installation you're looking at. And this graph just kind of shows you where those prices have gone in the last decade. The yellow line there indicates the cost per unit of solar. The blue bars indicate how much solar has been installed. So some of the reduction in cost has been due to technology changes, but a lot of it, as you can see with the amount of solar that's been installed in the US, actually corresponds more to economies of scale, things like that. Countries like China, Germany, the US, Canada, really ramping up solar and solar panel production has allowed those prices to drop quite a bit. But unfortunately, obviously these systems still are not free. So there's still a lot of ways that we have to figure out how to pay for this. And with that, I'm gonna shift gears and hand the floor over to Amanda for our second speaker, I should say. And Amanda, the floor is yours. I'm gonna switch our presentations into yours, so go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Sam. My name is Amanda Schoenebeck, as you said, a program manager at the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. If you are unfamiliar with the MREA, you can go right to the second slide. We are a nonprofit that was formed in 1990. We are a member-based organizations, and we have a whole bunch of different training options that we do and then different programs that we run. So I have some of that listed here, but today we're going to talk about schools, or I'm going to talk about schools, why schools should consider solar, why schools are going solar, and then how you can help your school or your community's school start going solar. So next slide there. So I think the first thing is as Sam mentioned, that the price of solar has come down significantly. But even more though, how is that connected to schools? The Focus on Energy program did a study, and they found that the average size school district is spending about $100 million in energy costs every year. And that's the largest expense, behind the cost of personnel. So it's a significant cost, and it's often considered a fixed cost. So again, like Sam said, if you're doing those efficiency upgrades, switching out the LED lights, HVAC upgrades, and you kind of want to take things to the next level, that's where solar comes in. The other thing is that in the bottom right corner, you're seeing that the production of solar energy mimics the energy use of schools throughout the day. So school districts, as you know, if you work for one, have a different type of energy billing where you get a charge for how much energy you're using at once, called the demand charge. So you are able to most times reduce that demand charge because you're lowering the peak of that graph there because it's right when the sun is producing energy. Next slide. And I'm just going to quick go through this here. Again, the prices come down significantly. It's making it financially lucrative for school districts. This is just showing over time the average cost of solar installations, mirroring right alongside solar school installations. Next one. And then again, this one's showing the pricing coming down, and it's showing the amount of installations at schools going up significantly. Again, that makes logical sense. The only thing that I want to add here is that this is from 2017. We're going to be having a lot of even more reduction and more numbers. And this organization that put out this this chart, and they have a new one coming out at the end of this month. So we're going to see some updated numbers here, which I'm sure are going to show the same trend. A lot of the schools that I've been working with here are showing the cost per watt, which is what these numbers are, at about 150 or 160 a watt. And if you don't know what that means, again, you're just looking at, 10 years ago, it was like 664 a watt. Now it's at 150 for schools. So again, huge decrease. Next slide. Beyond financial savings, there's a ton of other benefits that schools are able to take advantage of, which is kind of what I want to focus on. Obviously, there's the environmental benefits, which is huge with climate change, reducing your carbon footprint, emergency response and resilience. If you want to tie in some batteries to your system or keep it open for potential to add in batteries, that means that your school can, if the power goes out, your school can still have energy and be a community area where folks can come to in case of an emergency. The other big thing here is community engagement. Schools are centerpieces of communities. So when they do something like adding solar, the whole community is going to pay attention. The whole community can learn about the benefits of solar all at the same time and get engaged. And so you can start seeing the spread. If one school does it, other surrounding districts are doing it, and then other businesses are thinking about it, other homeowners are thinking about it. So it just spreads from the school focal points. And the last three I'm going to expand on a little bit in the following slides. So next slide. We are growing. The clean energy jobs in the Midwest, in the US, and Wisconsin continues to grow, as you can see from some of the statistics here. Prior to COVID-19, there was, we were talking to a lot of installers who used the word desperate to try to find employees. They're limited sometimes in, not by the projects that existed, but by how much work they could do because of how many employees they have. And this industry, the clean energy industry, has good paying career jobs that the next generation really needs to know about as options. And having solar on site is really a good opportunity to train them and show them this type of job growth. Next slide. And to drive that point home, I did want to just show this slide here that they found that in the US, clean energy added its jobs 70% faster than the overall economy from 2015 to 2019. And again, prior to COVID, the industry employed 3.4 million Americans, which is more people than worked as school teachers and 3 times as many worked as fossil fuel industry. So as our national economy continues to transition away from fossil fuel, this industry is just going to keep growing. So it's a really solid career choice for the next generation. Next slide. And I think that as I've been driving home this point, part of our program is that we get you in touch with different curriculum, ways to add this solar stuff into your curriculum and energy education in general. So some of the folks that we work with here are the CRATE Institute and then the Wisconsin K-12 Energy Education Program, or KEEP. They both have downloadable curriculum resources, and they both, when it's not a pandemic, offer in-person trainings of various types. So I encourage you guys to check those out. They're very useful, but also in addition to that, learn from other schools and what other teachers are doing. There's a lot of people in schools in Wisconsin that are already adding stuff to your curriculum, so you can learn from them. You don't need to reinvent the wheel there. Next slide. And this is just showing in the upper right-hand corner is Deerfield Community School District. It's a couple of days that they had with their solar energy production, and that mirrors kind of what Sam showed earlier. And you can use these dashboards to engage students in learning in real time about solar. They can calculate the production of the sun. They can see in real time again how snow coverage or clouds is going to impact that energy, and they're just going to get more excited about these careers, about clean energy, about renewable energy. The picture on the left, I think, is really powerful. It's the newly built Oregon School District Forest Edge Elementary School. It's the first net zero building or school, in Wisconsin. And it's just beautiful, showing the playground right in the center of the school. Next slide. And again, driving home the student part home. I know that we want to engage them and we want to educate them, but they already are super into this stuff. They already care about this. They're already passionate. I've seen students form and join school green teams or sustainability committees. I've seen students spearhead solar fundraising campaigns at their school. I've seen students spearhead 100% renewable energy resolution campaigns at their districts. And then I've seen multiple students take their work outside of their school district and join their city's sustainability committees to enact change on a whole different level. So this is just driving everything home. This is what they care about, and you can show them that you care about it too at your school district. And it ties everything together perfectly. Next slide. So I know that Marcy's going to be talking about the district's experience with solar at Madison Metropolitan, but I also wanted to give a little bit different of an example here, because with schools, the process it's different for every school. Your motivations are different. The system size is going to be different. Like Sam said, the net metering is going to be a little bit different if available for school districts. So the Merton School District story started when a school board member was getting solar on their own home, and they found that they were going to be saving money. And at the time, the district was already looking into energy efficiency stuff, and they've kind of exhausted most of that stuff at that time. So they decided to look into solar themselves. They started looking more. They consulted with SunVest for some initial numbers, and they found that it really made sense. So after doing a lot of the work internally, they have a 389 kilowatt system that's producing about 2/3 of the energy of the district, which is an elementary and a middle school. And they got about $100,000 in grants and incentives, and the remaining amount they put into, they used a low interest loan. And over the duration of the loan, they're essentially breaking even, and it's not costing them anything. And then after the loan is over, they're going to be saving a whole bunch of money. So average annual savings of $70,000 with a 30-year cash flow of $1.4 million. So that's huge. It's a way for a school district to save money without cutting any educational activities or programs. Next slide. And the superintendent is just thrilled with the whole process. They're in Waukesha County. This whole thing was originally financially motivated. He just is a big proponent of it, saying our entire experience from start to finish was fantastic. School districts need to, at minimum, pursue the opportunity that solar power might afford their district. After we looked at grants, the opportunity to create our own power and the very quick return on investment solar was something we couldn't ignore. So I implore you to help your own school district look into if you can get the same benefits, or if you're not affiliated with the school district, be that person that approaches schools for that. Next slide. So I know Sam went over a little bit of this, but for some next steps, and if you want to figure out if solar is a good investment of your school, I have 3 kind of broad general starting points. And the first one is establish a solar planning team. None of these projects happen without somebody pushing them forward. Sometimes it's one person, but a lot of times it can be better if you have a group of people who have different expertises and requirements for something. So I put some lists here, and for, sometimes it's the school board member, sometimes it's a student group, but there's always somebody that's spearheading something to go forward. And again, like Sam said, you kind of have to learn the basics of solar and then learn the basics of what to expect throughout the process of developing and getting solar installed at your school. Next slide. And then something that can be big and confusing and different for every school, again, is going to be your financing and ownership options. There's a lot to try to figure out. And so you need to be able to figure out if it's feasible for your school. You have to look into if you have any operating budget availability. Can you go to referendum, tie this into other upgrades? Are you able or willing to take out a loan like Merton did? Can you work with students and the school to do a big fundraising campaign? The Eau Claire School District is fundraising the entire amount of their 2 installations at their high school. So it's definitely things that have all been done here. And then you need to kind of figure out your different type of ownership type. Do you want to own the system yourself? You want to work with another entity to have a third-party ownership, so you don't have to come up with the full funds initially. And then there's also some utility programs where they kind of rent your roof and they pay you a little bit of rent on the roof space, but you don't actually get the benefit of the financial savings from the solar itself. So there's a couple resources I linked at the bottom here. The first one's going to help you show for any system size what estimated energy production you can expect. And then the bottom one helps you get some rough financial estimate numbers if what your payback period, for instance, is going to be. Next slide. But a lot of this information can also, you need to work with other folks who know what they're doing. Solar contractors have done this. They've worked on schools. They've worked on solar installations. This is what they live and breathe. So definitely get in touch with a contractor. Most times they can do a site assessment for you and financial analysis at no cost. So this is going to be telling you if the roof is a good place, what kind of system size you maybe are going to want or consider. They're going to look into different grants and incentives for you, and they can, again, give you some rough estimates on what it's going to cost you, and then what your payback could be if you move forward with it. So it can really help you figure out if you're going to move to the next level and make it happen. The 4 resources I have listed here are some really good places to find Wisconsin solar contractors here. So click on those, or we'll send this to you later, and look up some places. You can also obviously reach out to other schools that have gone solar, figure out who they went solar with, and if they had a good experience with that contractor, you can reach out to them as well. Through the Solar on Schools program, we do have case studies that we're developing that are showing different information about each project, and then it has the installers listed there as well. Next slide. So speaking of Solar on Schools program, what do you do there, Amanda? We provide a grant. I think that's the biggest thing, up to $20,000 valued for your project. So if you're trying to convince your school to go solar, be like, hey, I know that we have at least $20,000 of a grant to go solar. Let's at least look at the numbers here. But in addition to that, we developed a resource center, which is probably the second biggest thing. It is a whole bunch of different resources to kind of walk you through the whole process so you can have some level of understanding as you're moving through it. And we have expert presented videos, different Wisconsin solar school case studies, peer mentor networks. You can get in touch with different facility staff or superintendents or other folks at schools that have gone through the process. And then we also have some RFP templates and other templates to kind of help you when you're putting your own RFP and project together, so you don't, again, need to reinvent the wheel. You can learn from what other folks are doing. But again, we work with you to develop customized case studies so that you can have for promotion. We can help you with fundraising assistance, get the word out through our member base. We can distribute your RFP through our network of installers so you get the most bids possible. Again, like Sam said, you want to get as many bids, or at least a few, so you can compare them and really make sure that you're getting a quality price and a quality system design. And then obviously curriculum resources are also integral, as I spearheaded the point home earlier there, but we have a lot of those, access to those as well with the program. Next slide. And then one final point I want to make is that schools are going solar in the country and in Wisconsin. This on the chart from this chart on the right is from 2017. We had about 130 solar schools in the state. A lot of these projects were smaller installations from an earlier grant thing, and they were intended for educational purposes. But now that the prices come down so much, there's so many other benefits that schools can take advantage of. That's what we're really reaching out to do with the Solar on Schools program, is to help you guys realize those benefits. I've listed the different grant recipients from 2019 to 2020 so far. There's a lot more that are in the works that are developing projects, and we really want to help your school be on this list next time we do one of these presentations next year. And I believe that is all I have. I knew I threw a lot of information, but I'll be here for questions, and I think my contact information will be at the end. So, thank you.
Great, thanks Amanda so much. That was like really great, really awesome information. I'm going to talk now a little bit about some of the other programs that are offered as well that can help organizations, even schools, with some of the fundraising, with some of the offsetting costs for these solar arrays. The NETS program, and this is a little self-serving, is I'm going to talk about my program, sort of a sister program to Solar on Schools, which is called Solar for Good. Solar for Good, it does a lot of the same things that Solar on Schools does, but we focus almost exclusively on mission-based nonprofit organizations and houses of worship as well. What we offer is very similar to Solar on Schools. We do solar panel donations. Basically, it's worth about, as Amanda said, anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 of the total cost of the array. A lot of organizations that we've done with, because nonprofits typically need smaller arrays than a public school would, a lot of those organizations actually can get virtually all of the panels they need free. Some of the bigger ones, of course, don't get quite all of them for free, but they definitely get a really good head start with our solar panel donation. This year, fall 2020, we're also offering a supplemental round of straight grants, cash grants, if you will. Solar for Good used to be just a cash grant donation, or we would grant cash grants to nonprofits. Over the first 2 years, there were a few projects that still could not, unfortunately, gain all of the financial resources that they needed. So a few of those grants left unclaimed. And now we've taken those remaining grants together, and we're going to offer an additional round now. So we have about $100,000 to offer nonprofits that want to go solar. That grant is laid out here, 20% of the installed cost, and up to a $10,000 grant if you have a system that's under 75 kilowatts. If you're a bigger organization, that grant can be up to $20,000 of the total cost as well. So definitely have a limited pool of funding, but we certainly want to do as many solar arrays this year as possible. And hopefully the combination of those two will definitely get some organizations to act and get some solar installed this year. I do also want to point out one thing, that there's no double dipping. You can't get both panels and money. So definitely something to consider if you're looking at what type of grant is more valuable to your organization. Another way an organization can save money is through the Focus on Energy program. Focus on Energy offers a whole slew of energy efficiency programs. There is a incentive, sort of a rebate program for new solar installations, and that incentive, is kind of laid out here as follows. So depending on what size array your organization needs, that can vary a lot, or that can vary your incentive by quite a bit. But Focus on Energy is a really key component to the puzzle in terms of paying for these arrays. So definitely consult Focus on Energy if you are interested in this process, because it is a big help in getting these arrays paid for. Now, with that said, we're going to hand it now over to Marcy, and she is going to talk about how the Madison Metropolitan School District and West High School did their solar array. So Marcy, I'm going to switch presentations, but you have the floor.
All right, hello, thanks for being here, everybody. And I'm excited to share some information with you today about a case study. And we're going to focus on West High School. You can go to the next slide, please. West High School is one of 6 high schools, one of our 4 comprehensive high schools in Madison, and West serves about 2,200 students in grades 9 through 12, and that's a lot of students for the size of the building. And West is also somewhat landlocked might not be the exact right term, but maybe more neighborhood locked. There are homes, you know, right up practically to the front door of West High School, not a lot of parking, and we'll talk about why that matters a little bit later on. So that tells you just a little bit about West. They have a strong tradition of, you know, scholarly achievement, and they have a very engaged student body. So we were fortunate in the Madison Metropolitan School District that I think it was about the 2015-16 school year, some students from the West High Sustainability Club got really involved and motivated about the possibility of having solar at West High School. And like Amanda mentioned, you know, sometimes it takes that one person or a group of people to bring these projects to the fore. And we're really fortunate that we had students who were very interested in this. And, you know, one student in particular who wrote grants, you know, got the word out into the community, was successful at fundraising, and really got the ball rolling on this project. So we're really grateful for that. And you can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of being project ready, there are some important things that Sam and Amanda have already talked about today that I want to reiterate that were also key in this project as well. Of course, enthusiasm and support, buy-in from whoever needs to have bought into these projects for them to happen is key. Community buy-in, I think awareness at your school or your nonprofit organization. And by awareness, I mean, whoever it is, like doing some due diligence to figure out whoever it is that needs to be aware and understanding that there's an interest in this project, who can be involved from the front end so that you can think about things, some of the logistics, right? Where will it go? Sam talked earlier, how does the roof look? And in terms of where it will go, that's particularly, was of a particular interest at West because, like I said, there's not a lot of room there. You know, they don't have a football field, they don't have a lot of green space, they have some, but, you know, more limited than some other school districts where I've been in Wisconsin where, you know, they have their solar array sort of back off in the corner of their large green space and they, you know, maybe have a chain link fence around it. Those things weren't an option for West because they're using all the space that they have. So the roof was sort of the natural location to look at for a solar array, but they can be, you know, as you all know from, they can be in other places as well. In terms of thinking about the finances of the project, this project ended up costing about $170,000 plus expense for the roof replacement. The district did end up replacing the roof in the area that the solar array would be placed. So as Sam mentioned before, you get the full life of your solar panels. And as I had mentioned, the students were very successful in grants and fundraising. And of that $170,000, they procured a couple of large grants, one $25,000 grant. They brought in about $38,000 in different types of fundraising events, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. MSD, the school district, ended up providing about $60,000 in internal funds and replacing like I said, replacing the portion of the roof. And I think it's great to see, you know, one of the case studies that Amanda talked about, the Merton School District, which if I looked up the correct school district on my phone while she was presenting, has about 900 students. And they brought in $108,000 in grants and incentives. So it just goes to show that there are resources out there and you don't have to be a big district or a really big school to be able to make these things happen. So I wanted to point that out as well. You can stay on this slide for a while. Some of these grants, most of these grants have been mentioned. You can go back a slide, please. There we go. So, like I said, MMSD students wrote some grants. Some of the grants that were more technical in nature, we did have a consultant write for us, especially the technical pieces in terms of how many kilowatts would be generated, what portion of savings that would be, and so forth. So that was very helpful to have that resource. And then some grants our central office staff wrote. And I've listed some of the grants here. The Cleared Foundation, through the Solar on Schools program, is providing an in-kind, or has provided, I should say, an in-kind contribution of solar panels. The Left Coast Fund, which is an organization in California that one of our students connected us with, is going to provide a gift for us. The Left Coast Fund in particular provides the funds on a reimbursement basis. So that's just something to know if you are going to engage with them. You may need to be able to pay your contractor depending on how things are set up for your agency. And then get reimbursed for that. Focus on Energy, which I believe used to be called something else. That is now an incentive that exists. And then looking at your community foundations, there are lots of communities throughout Wisconsin that have community foundations, whether it be La Crosse or the Fox Valley, Green Bay, that may have an interest in this type of project. And then another place to look is corporate foundations. So if you have large employers in your area, they may have a foundation. I know that our students definitely did some outreach to corporations and were able to make inroads where sometimes the district hadn't been able to make inroads. So it was nice, I think, for corporations to hear that different voice coming to them for funds. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And then in terms of fundraising, I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the fundraising strategies that our students and our West High School community used. They really made it something that they wanted the whole school to be aware of. They had funding opportunities where you could sort of sponsor a panel for a certain dollar amount, and school really got into it. They had, maybe departments, the social studies department versus the math department, trying to see how many they could get to sponsor a panel. Some students groups sponsored panels. And then some of our feeder schools into West High School, our elementary schools and middle schools, also had competitions. So they got into it too. They did, things like Penny Wars. And it's kind of neat because then when they eventually get to West High School, they sort of have this legacy project that they had contributed to when they were younger. And things like Penny Wars, there's not necessarily going to bring in a big dollar amount, but really gets that community awareness out there and gets people, especially kids, investing in and aware of the project. All right, next slide, please. And then just talking a little bit, I think this builds on what Amanda had talked about your agency being ready for putting solar up at your school or your nonprofit organization. Just being aware of who needs to know what the plan is and who needs to approve the plan. Oftentimes that's your building services or facilities manager. Depending on what district you are, that job might be rolled into a job with the superintendent or the transportation person. So just becoming aware of who that person or people are that you need to be in contact with. And then they would usually handle the procurement process where the product has to go out to bid and you have to get bids, and usually there's specific guidelines. And like I said, that's usually something that the school district business office will take care of, where the bid has to be written in a certain way, and then it has to be publicized in certain places. There's a certain amount of time that interested organizations need to have to respond to the bid. And then all of that kind of rolls into what factors does your agency need to be considering for building things. So I know for MMSD, when you have to back map, right, from when you have the correct weather to be installing panels, when you have the space to do it. And again, this may not be an issue in other school districts or for other agencies, but for West, because they're so in such a tight space, there's not really a place to put a crane when there are students in session, because the streets are parked full of staff cars and student cars. So that became something we just needed to consider. Was, when is the right time, the right opportunity for us to be able to get this project done? So there are things like that that might lengthen or contract your timeline on when the project can be completed. Okay, next slide, please.
Marcy, I just want to let you know that you're breaking up quite a bit. Maybe if you could just make sure like you don't have any feedback or anything going on.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, and then once you have your financing in place and once you have all of your organizational issues taken care of, then you are ready to build. Next slide, please. Can you hear me now, Sam? Is that any better?
It's a little better. You're still breaking up, but it's okay. Keep going.
Okay. All right. So this is the roof of West High School, and it is this is a photo taken sort of mid-project, and I think everybody learned a lot. I know I learned a lot about solar and all of the different components. You can see where the these white boxes are on installed on the wall, and it's just very interesting, all the different pieces that you can learn about as you're doing these projects. Next slide, please. So just wanted to show you a little bit of the project moving along. Next slide, please. And there it is, much closer to completion. And happily, we are closing in on completion of this project. Might even be done as I speak, because I know we've been close for several weeks. And I think that's another thing to keep in mind, that this started quite some time ago, right? Like I said, I think it was 2015, 2016, when our enthusiastic students first got the ball rolling on this. It is 2020 now. Of course, we've had a pandemic thrown in there that nobody planned for, which altered timelines a little bit. But in terms of getting all the funding in place and then going up to bid and running into a couple of snags, here and there, we are finally at the point where we're getting that array on the roof of the high school, and it's a very exciting moment for all involved. Another thing I wanted to mention, to build on what Amanda said, Madison College has a program where they educate sort of future installers, and I wanted to point that out as maybe an option for people to partner with Madison College or with other two-year schools that may be able to participate with you either in planning or site visits or maybe even installation, depending on what regulations your organization is under. And so then you have these young people coming out and participating and contributing and preparing for their career in solar as well. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about grants and being grant ready. Just want to check my time. Okay, great. And in terms of being grant ready, sometimes grants can really feel overwhelming if you haven't written them. And having all of your information in one spot can be very helpful. That might be information you would get from your business number, from your business office. If you're a school district, your Board of Education members, or if you have a committee that's working on the solar project, having their names all noted down. If you have been collecting grants or participating in fundraising for your solar project, what grants were those? What amounts were they? That can be really encouraging to a lot of funders when they see that, you know, someone else or another organization or another foundation has already contributed to this project. Next slide, please. And when you're writing a grant, most of them will ask in one way or another, to one extent or another, about these items. So they want to know what your need is. They want to know what outcome you're trying to achieve. And with solar, it's pretty straightforward. And in my experience, many of the solar grants have been quite technical in nature, where you're just maybe giving them some background information on your organization, who you serve. But then it gets pretty technical. What are you going to install? And what is the expected return on investment for that? And what is your budget? And what is your budget based on? Next slide, please. So again, looking at what will the return on investment be, and a really important piece when you're putting solar arrays on educational entities is what are the learning opportunities that you'll be incorporating into your into this project for your students. So for West High School, it's important to them to be able to have some type of learning kiosk available so that students could see, hey, what's happening up on the roof? How is that saving our school and our school district money? So that's another key piece that you'll want to have thought out and be able to explain in your grant applications. Next slide, please. In terms of doing finding grantors, a lot of them have been mentioned on here today, which is fabulous. Amanda mentioned the resource site that they have on their website. That will be very helpful. In terms of looking for other grants, there is a website called Candid, where you can look for information on funders in terms of what they fund and the types of gifts that they give. If you're located near Madison, the Memorial Library on the UW-Madison campus has a grants information collection. And the nice thing about that is they have access to some subscription-based services that would otherwise be quite expensive. And you're free to use those that subscription service to search for grants. And they also have print resources as well. And key to note that Memorial Library is, I believe, only open by appointment right now. So don't make a trip to Madison thinking it's going to be open. I think it's by appointment only right now due to the COVID-19. Next slide, please. And then a key piece about grants is just tailoring your searches and tailoring your proposals to foundations or individuals that are interested in what you're interested in. So they're interested in sustainability. They're interested in solar. We're very fortunate to have solar on schools available to us. You know, in the case of West High School, we're very fortunate that we had a student who was out there you know, searching for foundations and organizations that would be interested in solar and in environmental education. Next slide, please. Okay, and then just you know, in general, when you're writing grants, try to think like the funder. What does the funder care about? What type of group are they? Are they a corporation? Are they a family foundation? And how might that funder understand or not understand your program? You know, I would imagine that when our students wrote to the Madison Community Foundation, that's a group that's much less familiar with solar than Solar on Schools, right? Which clearly knows a ton about it. So you need to keep that in mind and sort of adjust your text and what you're sharing with them accordingly. And then another thing to keep in mind is being able to answer the question of what the funder gains by funding you in particular. Is there an interesting story there? Is it, you know, how did the initiative to get solar on your school or at your organization get started? So those are good things to keep in mind when you're writing grants. And let's head to the next slide, please. And I think that a main thing about grant proposals is you really want to keep the reader happy. And you can go to the next slide, please. And then sometimes the most important thing, as with any project, is to just get started. Write first, edit later. Make sure you follow all the rules, even if you think they don't make sense, or like sometimes I say, if it's not the way you would do it at home, or not the way you would set it up, that's okay, but still follow their rules. It's not gonna make you win a grant, but you know, if they ask for 12 copies and you don't do that, it just gets things off to not a great start in their review process. Next slide, please. And then for your budget, you wanna make sure that all of your project needs are covered, and you want to make sure you cross-reference the budget with what you talked about in the narrative. So if you talked about having, you know, learning kiosks and supplies for students to measure things and test things, and then that doesn't show up in your budget, you're going to leave your funder wondering, like, did you just forget that piece? Is somebody else paying for it? So anything that you're talking about having funding for in your grant narrative, you want to be talking about having funding for in your budget. Next slide, please. And that wraps it up for us. So happy to turn it back over to Sam and get ready for questions and answers if you've got any.
Okay, thank you, Marcy, so much. That was a lot of great information. Just gonna keep it rolling here because we are starting to run out of time. I'm gonna talk just very briefly about financial information because there are, you know, an infinite number of ways that, you know, groups can pay for their solar installations. First is just kind of the most obvious, cash or savings, if you have that on hand. I know a lot of us don't, but that is kind of the first one that I always touch on. Capital fundraising program or something like a bond referendum would probably be next. You certainly, as Marcy pointed out, you know, want to talk to other donors or maybe get other donations. Depending on what type of organization you are, you might be able to look at PACE or possibly another third-party financier. There are solar-specific loans out there. There are other ways to do financing for solar installations in Wisconsin, and we can certainly talk more about those if we need to. So I wanted to wrap up again by kind of talking about what we talked about earlier, and that was how to go solar. So hopefully by now, you at least know a little bit about kind of how solar works. Again, seek out multiple bids from solar contractors, 2 to 3. You want to know, you know, you want to get your full range of options when it comes to solar. After that, ask questions of your solar installer, of groups like Renew Wisconsin and Midwest Renewable Energy Association. You know, why is one contractor suggesting a 100 kilowatt system and another 150? Why is one suggesting you offset, or why are they all only suggesting you offset 60% of your power if you want to, you know, offset all of it? So ask those questions and then get those answers too. And then, of course, analyze your financial situation, make sure it works for you. And then once you do that, evaluate the entire situation. Solar does not work for everyone, but hopefully it can work for most of us out there. And then once you have all of that information, you can decide and see if solar is right for you. So with that, we still have a little bit of time left for questions. So Morgan, have you been monitoring the questions in the chat? Before we do that though, I just want to, does anyone out there have any questions they'd like to ask? If you do, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, Morgan, you can go right to the questions that are in the chat room.
Yeah, so we had a question come in from Eric. He's calling in from Iowa, and he's wondering if you have any information for grants or funding outside of Wisconsin.
I do not. Amanda, your organization is a little bit more regional. Do you have any information on that?
So for schools, I sort of do. The folks that I look to, it's Generation 180. They have a national solar schools kind of campaign information that they put together. That's the folks that put out the document that I referenced. They have, by state, they have listed different resources. So for Wisconsin, Solar on Schools and Focus on Energy are listed, but they might have different stuff listed for Iowa. The other one, I think, is Marcy talked about the Left Coast Fund. They actually renamed it to the Solar Moonshot Program, which is run by Hammond Climate Solution, Hammond. They have funding at least through the end of this year, they have a certain amount that this gentleman had put together to make systems throughout the nation go forward. So I would look into that, and if there's funding available yet, give that an application to try, depending on where you are. But definitely reach out to Gen 180 as well.
Yeah, Marcy, do you have any other suggestions? I know you had a whole list of grants that West High School applied for.
Yeah, and mine were mostly for Wisconsin as well.
Oh, reach out to, I mean, your the local contractors and stuff too, especially if they work with schools or other nonprofits and stuff. They're gonna know what's gonna be applicable for your area. So again, reach out to a contractor and see if they have any more local information.
Yeah, solar contractors are usually very knowledgeable about the rebates and incentives in their area. They kind of use them as selling points. So that's even more of a reason to solicit multiple bids, because hopefully between the 2 or 3 bids you get, your solar contractors should be able to give you a whole slew of information about any potential rebates or incentives that are out there. Okay, next question, if there is one.
We had a couple questions come in from Tanya, and they got answered very well by Ryan in the chat. So thank you, Ryan, for answering those questions. But her questions were regarding periodic maintenance and how well panels withstand against atmospheric events. So if you want to read a little bit about those in the chat, you can, or if any of our presenters want to make a quick note about either of those.
Yeah, they are susceptible a little bit to atmospheric events. I used to be a meteorologist, so I definitely know a little bit about this subject. The panels are a lot more resilient, I think, than most people think. They can withstand, most of them can withstand up to golf ball size hail. The racking can usually withstand hurricane force winds. There was a huge hurricane that went through North Carolina a few years ago. It knocked out, I think, the natural gas plant, but the solar panel farm, the solar farm was still online and producing power. That being said, of course, they're not completely indestructible. And then for maintenance, there's really not a lot of maintenance that goes into a solar array. The process by which solar panels make electricity is through a chemical reaction. There's no moving parts, so there's not really a whole lot to replace. You might occasionally have to replace the inverter because there is a little bit more working parts there, but most of those will still also last 10 years. And I know with some inverter companies, you are allowed to, or you're able to purchase extended warranties for those inverters as well. So just like with all technology, it's getting better, getting durable, getting more long lasting. Anybody else want to add on to that?
Oh, you did good.
Okay. Any more questions, Morgan?
Yep, we had one more question come in from Vicky. Amanda, I think it was regarding your response in the chat that Martin School District took about 15 months from when the school board approached the district. And she is wondering if 15 months is an average or more of an exception to generally how long it takes for schools to go solar.
Schools are it depends on every single district what's going to happen. It depends if you have the support of folks already wanting to go forward. And because if you need to convince them first, that's going to take a while. But there are several schools that can do that turnaround in like the 15 months. The Eau Claire School District is doing it in less than a year, I believe. It does sometimes take a little longer for school districts because there can be a lot of hoops to jump through and get a lot of approvals and stuff. I'm sure Marcy could speak to that. So we have seen them take several years sometimes, but sometimes it just goes really fast. It depends on who's spearheading it and pushing it through. They can be a little bit faster in other states that have more financing availability, like third-party financing. Is much more widely available in some other states, and then they're like super fast. But yeah, it's just got to start digging in and figure out what your situation might be.
Yeah, and I would imagine that it took a little longer in the Madison School District. I think part of the reason is we're such a large organization with 27,000 students and 3,000 plus employees, a community that is very watchful of how business is being conducted. So there's a lot of scrutiny. So that's probably on the longer end of things. And then I think as Amanda had put, or someone had put in the chat, just some timing issues occurred with, okay, we need to get the roof fixed and we can do that at this time. That needs to happen before this time. So it's kind of a, getting the dominoes to line up. So hopefully that's a little bit longer than it would take in general.
Yeah, and I know from a nonprofit perspective, whether it's a school or a church or a humane society or anything, as Marcy pointed out, the more layers there are to that organization, the more sort of checks and balances there are, probably the longer it's going to take. Amanda talked about having sort of a catalyst to someone that drives the project forward. We at Renew call that a solar champion. And I tell people that if you are really excited about a solar project and you're looking around the room for the solar champion and you can't find him, it's probably you. So good luck. So thank you all. I know we're over time already. I think I did see one more question, but I know Marcy has to head out. So Marcy, I just want to just see if there's any other final comments you wanted to make.
I just want to say that it's great to see the interest here, and thank you all for coming.
Great. And I think there was one more question that came in, Morgan. Was I wrong on that?
Yep, nope. Ellen asked one more question, and she said, for a nonprofit, do the solar panels have to be on the roof? Our building is on the historic register, and I don't think they would allow them on the roof, but possibly on the ground.
Yeah, solar panels definitely do not have to go on a roof. For the most part, it's just that's where they make sense. We had an organization in Madison here who had that exact same problem. It was First Unitarian Society. They had an original Frank Lloyd Wright building, as you can probably guess, both for preservation and for functionality. Solar panels just did not make sense on the roof. So yeah, they can go on the ground nearby. They can go on a garage nearby or something else. They definitely do not have to go on the roof. It's just that's usually where they make the most sense, and it's usually where there's the most clearing and the most available sunshine. Okay, well, we are over time here. I know Amanda and I can still hang out for a little bit longer, though, if there are more questions. If you're not into that, or if you think of a question later, our contact information is all there. We always like to get questions from folks. We're always eager to help, so that information is there as well. This webinar was recorded. We are going to be putting that up on our Renew Wisconsin YouTube page and hopefully on our Solar for Good webpage too. And that address is in the chat, I believe. It's renewwisconsin.org/solar-for-good/. So thank you to Marcy, Amanda, thank you as well. Thank you to everyone for tuning in today. Really appreciate it. And good luck on your solar projects. Thanks.